Thanks, Daryl. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Harvey J. Cohen of Duke University. Dr. Cohen is a professor, director of the Center for the Study of Aging and Human Development, and chair emeritus of the Department of Medicine. Dr. Cohen co-chairs the Cancer in the Elderly Committee for the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. He is the current president for the American Federation for Aging Research, also known as AFAR, and a friend of the Alliance, and a past president of the American Geriatric Society, the Gerontological Society of America, and the International Society of Geriatric Oncology. Dr. Cohen is also a leader in the cancer aging community of the American Association for Cancer Research. You can check out more of his impressive credentials in the full bio that's included in your briefing packets. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cohen.
Thanks, Sue, and thank you to the organizers and to all of you for being here and to allow me this opportunity to speak with you today. Clearly, I don't have enough to do because I've been spending too many time outside my day job. But just to put this in context from my background, my original training was in oncology, and then now, well over 30 years ago, through a series of unplanned circumstances, I got more and more involved in the area of geriatrics and gerontology. And in the interest of combining those two interests, I've maintained a focus in what has now come to be known as geriatric oncology, essentially the oncologic care for older people. And that's a subject that's dear to my heart and one I want to talk with you about today. I just realized there is a generation gap here. I was noticing Sue's and Daryl's notes, and they're all on nice type stuff. I've got these handwritten notes. My kids like to say I don't have a smartphone, I have a dumb phone, and that is true. But hopefully the information will be useful. So you've heard some of the data that really brings us here today, and it's really this interface of two demographic trends, which you've heard a little bit about. And I don't want to numb you with numbers, but I want to just put that in a little different context. And that is that the number of people over the age of 65 is going to more than double over the next 30 to 40 years. And more impressively, the number of people over the age of 75, 85, 95 are increasing at an even more rapid clip. And so we are clearly an aging population in this country and throughout, in fact, the developing world. As a result, in part of that, because cancer is a disease of aging, and it's a disease that actually increases progressively with each succeeding decade until people are at least at the age of 90. And because of that, about 60% of all cancer diagnoses occur in people over the age of 65. And over 70% of all cancer deaths occur in people over the age of 65. So this is clearly a disease where aging and cancer interface. Happily, as a result, in part of many of the successes of the past and the increases in longevity overall, cancer survivorship has been affected as well. And so over 60% of current day cancer survivors are over the age of 65 and 50% over the age of 75. And many of these people have been survivors of cancer for many years. And you'll hear from a very successful cancer survivor in just a few minutes. So this has come about from a number of things, but certainly a major part of this has been an impressive incremental growth that research in this area has produced. It has improved our approaches through surgical treatments, it's improved our approaches through radiation therapy and treatments, but perhaps most impressively and of interest here today, it has really improved our basic understanding of the basic biology of the cancer process, what's actually going on when cancer evolves. And through that has enabled us to really start targeting this underlying basic biology as a way to think about treating cancer. So there's been a lot of recent excitement in this area. This is an area that is really hot, as Daryl implied. And I think if you see any of the news magazines, you wouldn't be surprised. And that excitement has come in many areas, but in two particular that I just want to highlight briefly. One has been in the development of what have been called targeted agents. They're agents that are for systemic therapy that are directed at unique aspects of the cancer cell that are either totally unique or at least dominated in the cancer cell and not as much in normal cells, allowing these therapies to more effectively, quote, target the cancer cell. They're not perfect by any means, but their targeting is much more impressive. An example of that type of therapy are ones that are directed at particular enzymes, for example, or molecules within the cancer cell, such as one which is really was the first, in a sense, called Gleevec or imatinib, which is a treatment for chronic myelogenous leukemia, which very specifically targets molecules within that cell and has revolutionized the treatment of that disease. More recently even has been what Jarrow alluded to as immunomodulatory therapy. And these are therapies that try to take advantage of the body's own immune system. We've known about, quote, immunotherapy for years and years and years. It goes back a long time. But it has been largely unsuccessful over many years. And that's because we didn't really understand well what the basic mechanisms are that might allow that kind of therapy to work. And over the past decade or so, we've really started learning that. And so two types of therapies have been developed. One are antibodies that are actually directed against molecules on the surface of cancer cells. An example of that is a drug called rituximab. It's against a specific antigen on the surface of lymphoma cells and has revolutionized the treatment of that disease. A second type, more recently, has recognized the fact that cancer cells are pretty smart. And they've figured out ways to evade the body's natural defense systems that might be directed against it. And so they have developed molecules in their cells that migrate to the immune system cells, the so-called T cells, that are going to fight that invasion and block their ability to fight that cancer cell. And that's one of the main reasons why many of the therapies have failed in the past. More recently, we've learned ways to actually inhibit that blockade and free up the immune cells to be able to actually attack the cancer cells. These drugs have been called checkpoint inhibitors, and they actually have shown some dramatic responses, effectiveness, unfortunately often short-lived, but the proof of principle is starting to emerge, and these drugs are now starting to move into past clinical trials into general use in cancer patients, and have been used predominantly in melanoma, malignant melanoma, and more recently in lung cancer. And so there is a bright future, we believe, for these types of drugs, although a lot more work is going to be needed to get them to be fully, broadly active and fully effective. So this is all great, and so everything should be rosy, but everything's not quite that rosy. We need more work in this area, and we would urge support for that kind of basic fundamental work to refine our knowledge about the cancer cell and how these drugs can be tailored better. But we have a problem. And one of the problems is that the way we learn how to use these drugs as they're being developed is through clinical trials. And what we have found and known for some time is that the older population is woefully underrepresented in clinical trials. So, for example, the patients over the age of 65, remember 60% of all cancer in those patients are grossly underrepresented in trials. And a recent IOM report, which was focused on this particular issue of treating older patients with cancer in our aging world, noted that only 20% of patients that clinical trials had only 20% representation of patients over the age of 70, despite the fact that they represent 50% of the cancer population. So we're just not learning well enough about how to treat the older cancer patient. And that's an issue that we really need attention to. In fact, the IOM report urged action in this regard. And one of the actions that was urged, is relevant in this room because it was urged that Congress authorize the FDA to have more authority to require that any clinical trial being studied have a representative age population within it before a drug or a new treatment could actually be approved for care. And this is something I would strongly echo. So the older population, this wouldn't be a big problem if older population, older people were just the same as all the younger people. I can tell you from personal experience that's not true, and I know it from professional experience as well. So as people age, a number of things happen. There's changes in physiology, organ functions change. There are accumulation of diseases. You heard about the fact that the older people tend to have one, but tend to have often multiple diseases. There are changes in drug handling. There are many different things that happen. And what that creates is a very heterogeneous population. I often tell our trainees at home that if you want a challenge in medicine, you don't work with 30-year-olds, because they're all the same. Basically, you've seen one 30-year-old from a medical standpoint, you've seen one 30-year-old. But 80-year-olds are another story. You've seen one 80-year-old, you've seen one 80-year-old, because there's so much heterogeneity and so much difference from person to person, which requires a different approach when we think about cancer treatment. So this heterogeneity is something we have to address. And in recent times, research has shown us that there may be ways to do that. And one such way has been the application of what's called comprehensive geriatric assessment to the older cancer population. And here what we're doing is doing a multifaceted evaluation of an older patient, their medical situation, their social situation, economic situation, psychological situation, to get a fully rounded view of what that patient is like before we start thinking about what therapies we're going to offer. And I think this approach has the potential to really help us tailor treatment better. Often we talk about personalized medicine these days as thinking about cancer genetics, and that's sort of where the main focus has been, and it's very appropriate, it's important. But there's more to personalized medicine than just the cancer genetics, and what I would suggest is as we learn more from our geriatric assessments and combine that with our knowledge of the tumor biology, and further combine that with increasing knowledge of the host biology, the patient themselves, and biomarkers of function and of aging, we can create the ultimate in personalized cancer care. Not just the genetics, but the whole person personalized. And that, I think, is a goal that we really should strive towards. And research in this area is something we urgently need to have more of. And our goal here would be not simply just to extend survival, but to actually improve quality of life as well as the survival. And as it's been said, not just to add years to life, but to add life to years as well. And I think that's a goal most people would empathize with. So research in the area of cancer biology, as we mentioned earlier, has really started revolutionizing our approach to care. But there's another revolution happening, and that's our approach to research into the understanding of the basic process of aging. Just as we're trying to learn what the basic process of cancer evolution is, we're learning about what the basic process of the aging process is. And here we've started understanding what have been called the hallmarks of aging, individual processes and programs that seem critical in the aging process. Things like the dysfunction, increasing dysfunction of our mitochondria, which are the metabolic motors of our cells, or the fact that senescent or aging cells in the body can actually secrete molecules that are pro-cancer producing, and may explain in part the reason why the incidence of cancer increases progressively over our lifespan. So all of these could potentially be targets for cancer treatment or prevention, in fact. Indeed, as we increase our understanding of the basic biology of aging, the potential that we could actually delay quote, aging, but more importantly, delay the onset of age-related diseases really starts becoming possible. And there's a whole approach now that's been called the Jarrow Science Initiative, which is geared at this possibility, looking at research in the basic process of aging as a way to think about delaying that aging process, and in doing so, delaying the diseases of aging, cancer as well as others. If we could do that, in fact, it would actually dwarf the financial, not to mention human value savings that reducing cancer, for example, by 1% could do, which is enormous in and of itself. But imagine if we could actually delay all chronic diseases of aging by a year. This would produce multiple billions of dollars of savings and value and untold increase in value of human life. So this, I think, is a real area that we should put some stress on. And there's a lot to be done here. Some of these studies have been done in animal models. There's a proof of principle there. It looks like you can actually do this. Human studies are on the drawing board to start trying to do this in people. And the results could be dramatic, but a lot of work to be done and support needed, obviously. American Federation for Aging Research, which as you heard, I'm current president of, helps to fund some of this research, but they're a relatively small group, and this is a large one, and so we would sort of urge Congress and others to get behind this movement as well. I mentioned earlier that we've got an increasing number of cancer survivors, and they're increasingly an aging group of cancer survivors. And so this is a story of success, obviously, but sometimes with success comes challenge. And we have challenges in this area. We've come to realize that with cancer survivorship, there are late effects of cancer treatment, late effects of the cancer itself, and in the older cancer patient, adding to that the effects of the aging process, accumulation of other diseases, et cetera. So for the older cancer survivor, this is, in a sense, at least a triple whammy. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in that circumstance. And we need to figure out ways, and we need research to help figure out ways, the best way to care for that group of people. I believe that one of the targets here should be the merging of the skills of the oncologists and of the geriatricians to really build programs that can help manage such folks. And the IOM report speaks to that issue as well. And finally, I want to point out that to do all that, we need a workforce that's prepared to do it. And when I was privileged to be on that IOM committee, and when we were looking at this issue, it turned out that the workforce we currently have is not really well prepared for that, and we need to address this. So we need ways to support training that will provide the care providers who understand how to treat cancer, but also understand what the issues are as people age, and can bring both of those perspectives to bear on treating patients. This is, I believe, an opportunity to support joint training programs, for example, in oncology and geriatrics, that could produce people with that kind of expertise. There have been a small number of such people trained in this country over the last 10 years or so, but we need many more. And we need it not only for physicians, we need all disciplines that care for cancer patients to have this joint view of training. Nurses, social workers, the technicians, everybody dealing with the cancer patient needs to have that dual view to be able to care best for the older cancer patient. So, and then we'll need ways to study whether these approaches work. And so I think we have a great agenda to address before us. So there's a lot that's been accomplished. This is an era of unprecedented growth in the science and clinical knowledge that we have, but there's a lot more to learn, and to capitalize on this growth, a lot more to do. And I want you to remember that for everyone in this room, it's your parents and your grandparents we're talking about here. And in fact, recall a sign in a North Carolina coffee shop that I saw a while back that said, don't criticize the coffee, you may be old and weak someday yourself. So it's your future selves as well that have to be thought of here. and we all have something, all have a vested interest in something at stake. So I hope that you will take some of the things I said to heart and go out there and join the crusade that we're all on to better address, more research to improve our care for cancer patients in general, and certainly for the older cancer population. So thank you very much for listening.